Hello, my name is Bruce Miller, and I'm here today to talk about why most EDRMS projects fail and how you can make sure that yours does not. So by EDRMS, we mean Electronic Document and Records Management Systems or Solutions, particularly where SharePoint is your document management system. So what does compliance mean? Well, our intent is that every document in SharePoint adheres to or complies with the official retention schedule. And that's an essential ingredient in order for us to proceed with a disposition, where disposition means deleting the documents in accordance to the retention schedule. And delete, or disposition more correctly, means not only delete, it also means transfer to an archive if appropriate. So disposition simply means processing all the records at the end of their life cycle in accordance with what the retention schedule says. So now the question is, what do we have to do to make that happen? Well, as it turns out, there are two lethal threats to any EDRMS project. The two threats are, number one, failure to reach 85% classification accuracy, and number two is the failure to manage case records properly. And I guarantee you that if you suffer either one of those two, not only will the project fail, but there's a good chance that you'll fail along with it. So be careful, okay? In my opinion, most projects out there today suffer from one or both of these two failures. So there are two types of projects out there. There are non-purview and purview. The two failures are applicable to non-purview projects. If you are doing purview, then the two that I just talked about apply, but there's a third one, which is failure to deploy purview properly, okay? Purview is tricky to deploy, requires a lot more thought and care and management, and it's easier to get it wrong. So I have a third possible point of failure for that as well, and we will talk about that briefly in this session. Now, for all projects, there are three things to get right in order to avoid this failure. Number one is to get the SharePoint information architecture right. Number two is deploy case records properly. Number three is measure and prove that the system is compliant. And if you're using Purview, then you've got to get Purview deployed properly. And that means three things: avoiding the apply label button, custom building an auto apply policy solution, and number three is avoiding retention policies. So we'll talk about all of these in detail. Now, any experienced records manager knows this, which is if I give one document to 10 random users in your organization and ask them, is this a record? And then I ask them, show me where it belongs in the retention schedule, classify it against the retention schedule, you know what's going to happen, right? I'm going to get up to 10 different answers. And if I do the same thing with the same people a week or a month later, I'll probably get different answers still. So that means that in an electronic world, we cannot count on users to identify what is a record or to tell us where it gets classified in the retention schedule. It's just not safe. I've never, ever seen that work yet, and I don't expect to in the future. So here's a reality check. If we were to have 1,000 users in an EDRMS, we would end up with a flow rate of 12 records per person per day. Now, that means that there's no static fixed number of records. It's a flow, like the ocean, waves in the ocean. It's a wave of records coming at us every single day. And that number is 12. Where do we get 12? 50 inbound emails, 20% of which meet the legal definition of a record. That's 10 emails and 2 documents that people download or create per day. Those are statistical averages, okay? So that's 12 a day. If you have 1,000 users, well, that's 12,000 records coming at you per day, or 2.7 million per year. So the point of this slide is to illustrate this, is that if you were to need 1 minute, which you will, for every single document that you wanted to check, investigate, or do anything with, you would need 25 person days, 8-hour person days with no breaks, nothing. That's 25 full-time employees just to do that. That isn't going to happen. So the point I want to make here is that this flow of 12,000 a day happens to you. You cannot interfere with it. You cannot muck around with it. You can't examine it. You can do nothing with it. You can't, okay? So if there are mistakes, you can't find them, let alone fix them. It would take you way, way too long, okay? Now that leads to this question, which is where does compliance come from? One school of thought says compliance comes from end users. They decide what is the appropriate retention and they get to choose it. So that's one approach, which is compliance comes from end users. The second approach or school of thought says, wait a minute, why do users get a choice here? We should impose compliance on the end users. If this document has a 10-year retention period and they don't like it, well, that's kind of tough. That's what the rules are. So we impose it on the end users. In other words, it comes from the organization, not from the end users. Okay? So those are two completely opposite approaches to compliance. And I'm here to tell you that only one of them works, and that is the way that you impose it. If you expect users to do this kind of thing 12 times a day, meaning pick what's a record, put it into SharePoint, and tell us where it belongs in the retention schedule, that is a game you will never win, okay? I have never seen it worked, and I don't ever expect to see it work. So my point is that we have to impose compliance on the users, not the other way around. Okay. So that means for SharePoint, we have 5 choices of record software that we can use to do that, to accomplish it. And it means we're going to have to automate it because we can't count on the users. So thankfully, all 5 can do automation. Now remember this, please. SharePoint does not manage records and it never will. It's these 5 software products that do that. These 5 products live outside of SharePoint, but they apply record keeping control to the content inside SharePoint. So now let's talk about the things you need to do to get this right. The first one is the trickiest one, which is handling case records properly. You can safely assume that 60% of all your records are case records, okay? And it is the single biggest mistake in the modern EDRMS project world. I assure you of that. What I'm finding in the marketplace is that the vendors are kind of weak on it, particularly Microsoft's Purview, and the many of the records professionals, the buyers of this software, are also weak on case records. It has brought down way too many EDRMS projects. So let's get to it then. What are case records? Case records are records that belong to or are generated by business activities about people, places, events, or things. So the retention schedule, as you know, is just a list of business activities. A business activity I'll refer to as a category. So business activity, category, record series, bucket, they all mean the same thing, a business activity with an assigned retention rule. Okay, that's what a retention schedule is, a schedule of the rules, activity and rules. So with cases, people, places, events, and things, what's common about those activities is that they all are repeated adventures that come to an end. And I'll use audits as a great example. You might conduct a health and safety audit in March, and it might take a month, and it will generate a set of records unique to that audit in March. You might do a second audit in December, later in the year, for the financial statements. It's a completely different audit. It's a different adventure with a different start date, a different end date, and a different set of records that have nothing to do with the records back in March with that health and safety audit. So each adventure generates a set of records that is different from and independent of the records generated by a different adventure. So we call each adventure a case, okay? It's a collection of related records with a particular end date. So I'll give 3 examples of case records. One is people, employees. Each employee is a case, and they all terminate at some point, right? Another example is projects. All projects are an adventure with a different start date and a different end date for each project. And the same goes for contracts. Every contract is different from every other contract, and they have their own start date and end date. okay? So you have to keep the records for each case separated or independent of the records for all other cases. And a typical retention rule has three components: a trigger, a retention period, and an action at the end of the life cycle. So the trigger for case records is always the event date or end date, okay? The retention period is whatever you wish, and then the action is typically destroy, but it could be transfer, could be permanent, could be a number of actions, but we'll just keep it simple and keep it to destroy for now. So if we have 1,000 contracts, we have 1,000 adventures, 1,000 batches of records, and 1,000 contract end dates. Similarly, for employees, we will have 1,000 termination dates for each employee. And for projects, we'll have 1,000 project end dates for those projects, okay? And the idea is that the record keeping software will destroy the entire case as a group instead of individual documents within the case, okay? It doesn't have to be that way, but that's the norm. That's the normal posture. So what about the other 40% of the records? Well, we call those admin records, and they're members of an ongoing business activity that has no start and stop rhythm to it, like invoicing. Invoicing is constant. Every day of the week, there are invoices being processed. It never stops. There's no adventure to it where they do batch of invoices here and a batch of invoices there. Not typically, anyway. So the trigger for the three-part retention rule is the document's age. So here's how the software computes the age. It takes today's date, it subtracts from today's date the document's date, which gives it the age. And then it compares the age to the retention period. And if it's younger than the retention period, it's kept. If it's longer or older, then it marks it for end of life processing, typically destroy. Okay? So that's the difference between the two species of records. Case records are triggered by the end date. Non-case records, 40% of them, are triggered by the document's age. Okay? Now, this is a mathematical reality you have to know and understand. In SharePoint, which is our repository here, we have to put the documents in SharePoint, right? And if we have a document about a contract and we happen to have 1,000 contracts, then every time we put a contract document into SharePoint, we have to specify which contract is this document related to. That's a mathematical necessity, and we have to force it on the user. We can't let someone put a document about a contract into SharePoint and say, this is about a contract. Well, that's not enough to know. We have 1,000 contracts. Which contract is this about? So therefore, we need a method, a drop down, a pop up, a fly out, some mechanism to force the user to specify which of the 1,000 contracts or which of the 1,000 employees or which of the 1,000 projects this document is related to. That's mandatory. It's not optional. It's mathematical necessity, with or without records, I might add, because we can't do this. We can't put a document in about an employee and say, this is a performance review for an employee, but I'm not going to tell you which one. It's a secret. That makes no sense at all. So yes, we have to have a way to force the user to tell us which case the document is related to at all times in SharePoint. And that's our job. We have to set up SharePoint so that it works properly for the software, so the record software can do its job. Now, inside SharePoint, there's an extremely important mechanism called document sets, which is ideally suited for cases. In SharePoint, a document set should become a case, okay? Here's how. You create a library called employees, and each document set is an employee. A document set in SharePoint is a container. You can see them on the bottom here. There are 6 of them right here. That container looks like a file folder from the old days, but it's a container known as a document set. Its purpose in SharePoint is to group together related documents, but they have a document set has a magical capability which makes it perfectly suited for cases. which we'll talk about in a few minutes, okay? But know that for now, a doc set, what we affectionately call document sets, a doc set is a special container used for cases in SharePoint, okay? Now, in this diagram here, we have a fictional retention schedule with 250 administrative categories. No cases going on there. 250 different categories. And we have 3 categories that are case categories. One for contracts, one for employees, and one for projects. So the retention schedule here has 253 categories or business activities, 3 of which are case activities, these 3 here in red, okay? Now let's pretend for a moment that we have, well, we don't pretend, we know we have 12,000 records per day in a typical EDRMS with 1,000 users. So that means that of those 12,000, 60% of them are going to be case records. So that's 7,200. Every day, 12,000 records flow in, 7,200 of which are case records, okay? Where are they going to go in SharePoint? Where are all these 12,000 going to go in SharePoint? Well, that's up to you. You have to figure this out, which is what we're going to do now. There has to be a place for every record in SharePoint. In this instance, we have 250 different places for admin records. 250 categories equals 250 different places. For case records, we have 3, contracts, employees, and projects. But each of those 3 is broken into 1,000 possible containers or places. So here we have 253 places in SharePoint, but that's not the full story. The real story is there are 1,000 places or containers for contracts, 1,000 places or containers for employees, and so on. So a total of 3,000 different places to store case records. So of the 12,000, 7,200 are coming down the pipe, so to speak, and being sprayed at SharePoint. Where do they go? They go in one of these 3,000 different places because they're either about a contract, an employee, or a project. So there are 3,000 places for them to land in SharePoint. Now, the remainder, that would be 4,800. 4,800 records are being sprayed at SharePoint. Where are they going to go? They're going to go in one of these 250 different places. Okay? So again, summary, 12,000 coming in one day. 7,200 are going to go towards these 3,000 different cases. 4,800 are going to land somewhere in these 250 categories, okay? So the grand total here is 3,250 possible places where a record could go. Now, in the real world, you'll have hundreds of case categories. Each one will have an unknown number of cases. For example, fleet vehicles. The activity is fleet vehicle maintenance. How many vehicles do you have in your fleet? Maybe 20, maybe 100. Whatever it is, you have to have 20 vehicles or 20 cases for each of those vehicles. Do you do audits? How many per year? 50? Well, that means you have an activity or a category or a library called audits, and you're going to have 100 cases for audits, each audit being a case, right? So this goes on and on and on. And in your in your real SharePoint setup, you're likely to have tens of thousands of places for records to go. And yes, that is correct. And yes, that is normal. And yes, you got to get over it if it shocks you. Perfectly normal in an EDRMS. Now, the second thing we've got to get right is the SharePoint IA or information architecture. So think of it like a 3-layer cake that we're going to bake, okay? The first layer is the retention schedule. The second is the SharePoint IA, information architecture. And the third layer is what I call RBR, rules-based record keeping. That's how you're going to make this thing automated. automation occurs in the pink layer on the top. We use the one-to-one-to-one strategy, which means that one activity or category in the retention schedule equals one library in SharePoint of the same name, which equals one document type, or I'm sorry, content type in SharePoint with the same name. Okay? What is a content type? It's a container of metadata fields called columns in SharePoint. So a content type, think of it as a plastic shopping bag of columns for that library. Every library has a bag of columns in it, okay? So here we have two libraries. One is a category called safety, and it's an admin category. So the library is called safety. The content type in that library is called safety. We have another category called contracts. The library is called contracts. The content type in that library is also called contracts. But this library is divided into 1,000 document sets. Okay? So let's pretend we have a retention schedule of 800 categories, which is normal and typical for a municipality with 1,000 employees or any other business with 1,000 employees. So of the 800, 480, 60% of them, will be case structured. So the retention rule will be applied to the case as a whole. 320 of them will not be divided into cases. They're admin categories, so the retention rules are applied individually to the documents. Think of it like a conveyor belt. Each document rolls off the conveyor belt after the end of the life cycle. So it's a 10-year wide uh, a conveyor belt and operator rounds. For employee onboarding, it's a 5-year conveyor belt. Okay? So the retention schedule is a layer number one, and it has 480 categories on the right, which are case categories, and 320 on the left, which are not case categories. Now for the SharePoint structure, we're going to have 480 case libraries on the right divided into document sets. We'll have 320 libraries that will not be divided into cases. Regardless of whether they're admin or cases, they all need metadata, right? Descriptive metadata. So each library in a healthy EDRMS will have about 14 metadata fields. So if you multiply 14 by 800 categories, that means we will have 11,200 columns. But it's not really 11,200 columns. It's probably more like 1,000 unique columns. A lot of columns get reused. So it's 11,200 column mappings, meaning usages of that column in that library. Okay? 11,200. Every library, you had to specify what columns or metadata fields occur in that library, right? So the average turns out to be 14. The good news is that of those 14, users typically only have to enter an average of 2.1. Okay? So if you do this right, which is what we're showing you how to do, then it'll only be an average of 2.1. Some people philosophically are highly allergic to metadata because users complain that it's work to put in metadata. Fair complaint, but you get a lot back for that. That's the whole idea of SharePoint, is to make folders go away and replace them with metadata, right? Much, much better approach. So now we've got the second layer baked. Now we go up to the third layer. The third layer is something that no one will ever see, experience, or use except you. Only the records manager will ever go up into this pink layer. And what do they do there? Well, we're going to build content automation rules. What are content automation rules? They're the rules that you specify to say this retention rule will be applied to this particular content in SharePoint. So there are two piles or sets or stacks of rules you're going to create up there. The first one is retention rules. Now, we have 800 categories. That does not mean 800 retention rules. It'll probably mean 100 uniquely different retention rules. I'll give you the classic Canadian rule. Keep 7 years and destroy. That's one rule. That one rule could apply to 50 different libraries. Okay? So that's how you, or I shouldn't have said libraries. I should have said category. So that's how you end up with 800 categories, but only maybe 100 or so retention rules. So imagine a pile of retention rules, 100 of them. Content automation rules are different. That's a rule that says for this content in this place in SharePoint, use this retention rule and apply it to that content. But in this other place, apply this different rule, or maybe the same retention rule to this other place or for that other content. Okay. So that's what we do up here. Now, what do these rules look like? Well, I can tell you this, is that you'll end up with an average of about 3 rules per category, which in SharePoint speak means 3 rules per library. Either way, it's 2,400 rules, 3 times 800, right? So the rules say, for example, if the library name is operator rounds and the column or field approved contains yes, then we're going to apply the retention rule that says keep it for 10 years and destroy. Okay? And they can get much more sophisticated than this, but that gives you a picture of what a rule looks like. I'm going to take you on a little field trip here and show you what they look like in actual software. This is Collabware out of Vancouver, and you can see down below, you can specify the SharePoint column is department, the operator is equals, and the value is administration. So if for the content described by department equals administration, then you can apply a retention rule to that content. Okay. This is an example from Gimel out of Houston, Texas. Here we have, you can see the same kind of thing. The property is the metadata field or column. The operator commonly equals the value. So here we have library equals hiring. The content type is hiring record, and the status has to be active. So those are 3 conditions that have to be met for that content in order to apply a retention rule to that content. This is an example from Opus. Opus is the software product made by AvePoint out of New Jersey. So here, again, there's a lot going on in this screen, but the essence is the same. You can see a name, which is the name of the column, contains, which is the operator, and then the value. Okay, so here we have column approved equals yes, or column approved by matches Smith, right? You can get very sophisticated here. Once you've got that condition defined, then you apply the following term. What's a term? A term is what Opus calls a retention rule. Another example in Opus, which is, again, you can see the pattern, right? You can see the column name, contains, and the value. And you can put things like true document date must be older than 25 years. So that's the condition that specifies what content am I talking about in SharePoint. And then you assign a retention rule to that content. There's all kinds of details to make this very, very sophisticated. But at the end of the day, what we have is 800 categories in the library, 800 corresponding libraries in SharePoint, and 2,400 rules that you wrote. How long will it take you to write those rules? Quite a long time. I estimate 40 to 50 person days of effort. Notice I never said how long it'll take. I just gave you the effort level, 40 to 50 days of work for 2,400 rules. Now, if it's per view, you can pretty much double that. Okay, so now you've done that. So you've created your 2,400 rules, and look what happens. Those rules contain references to library names and references to the metadata column names. The rules can't work without those references. So what happens if you fool around with the names of the libraries? The rules break and stop working. What happens if you change the name or go fooling around with the names of the metadata fields used in these rules? Again, the rule breaks and you're no longer compliant. So in order for this thing to work, the middle layer in yellow, SharePoint, has to be static. Yeah. We can't have what we refer to as SharePoint in the wild, which is every day libraries are popping up and every day metadata is popping up. You can't have that. It has to stop. All these 3 layers lock the entire system together like Lego blocks. Don't touch it once it's working. Leave it alone and it'll work just fine. Okay? Now, how do we prove compliance? We're now handling our case records properly. We have a SharePoint information architecture that works, and the record software is now automating this process. Those rules are running 24/7 and everything's working fine. So how do we prove compliance? Well, there's one number that you need. It's called the CAR, Classification Accuracy Rate. And here's the scoop. We believe that in order to carry out a disposition, which is a mass destruction of records in the millions, um, you have to know how accurately the records are classified, meaning are they assigned the correct retention rules? Okay. And we believe that 85% is a minimum threshold. It would be higher in some business settings like medical, pharmaceutical, or food production, certainly nuclear plants, right? But for the rest of us, ordinary folk, 85% will stand up in court, generally speaking. Okay? So how do you prove that you're 85% there? Well, uh, it would take you, as we said earlier, 1 minute per document to do anything with it. And that includes checking it to see if it's properly classified. So if you were to check 1 day's worth of 12,000, you would need 25 days of work for that one single day. That's not going to happen. So you need a trick, and we thankfully have one. Now, I've got a few slides here showing examples. They're smaller examples. They're only 6,000 records a day. That's not a normal rate. That's half a normal rate. But it does illustrate that you would need a team of 6 people if you were to try to measure these at a 50% error rate, because that's 3,000 documents per day. You accumulate 15,000 at the end of the 15,000 mistakes at the end of the week. However, that's not really true, because I'm going to show you a magic tool that you can use to actually measure this without taking 25,000 days, but the tool doesn't tell you which are the right ones and which are the wrong ones. So if you were to try to check it, you're back to the beginning, you had to check all 6,000, you're back up to 13 days of work. Okay? That's 12 and a half rounded up to 13. This isn't going to happen. And your real number is 25 days, right? Because you're at the rate of 12,000 a day. So you would need 25 full-time employees. This ain't going to happen. Never. Not in our lifetimes. This just goes to show how errors build up and up and up. Can you imagine doing nothing for a year? 225 days have gone by. Almost 3 million records have come in. And you decide, I think I might check them to see what the classification accuracy rate is. You realize that's impossible, right? It is impossible. So we're stuck here, but thankfully there's a way out of it. We need to check those 6,000 every single day. Now, why have I dropped down from 12,000 to 6,000 all of a sudden? Because of my slides. I have examples for 6,000. Okay. So we're going to use statistics to do this. And what we're going to do is we're going to ask ourselves, if we use statistical sampling to come up with a classification accuracy rate, how many samples are we going to need? Well, there's a standard formula in statistics that tell us that. And the answer is going to be 95% confident, 19 times out of 20. Okay? Just like political polls that you've heard on the news regularly around election time. Same formula. We go online and we type in 3 words into Google. We type in sample size calculator. Lo and behold, on the web, there are hundreds of them, just like mortgage calculators and loan calculators. All you do is you type in your population of 6,000 in this case, and leave everything else alone, 95% confidence and a 5% confidence interval, and it'll come back and tell you that you need 361 samples, okay? That would take us 361 minutes. 361 minutes is 6 hours. Still way too much, but it's a whole lot better than 25 person days. It's a whole lot better. So now, how do we do this in a single day? Well, here's how. We have 10 departments, 100 people per department. 30, that means we distribute 36 samples per department, 36 each. That'll take each department 36 minutes to pull off. How do they do it? Very simple. They bring up in SharePoint all the records that came in that day, 600 of them, let's say, right? For each department. And then on the right-hand screen, they bring up the retention schedule. In SharePoint, they randomly pick 36 out of the 600, and they read the classification. So if the document is about expense report, then they look over in the retention schedule and look up expense reports, code 707. What did the software assign to that document? Code 707. It's a match. It's correct. So that's one that's correct. The next document is about fleet vehicle maintenance. Look it up in the retention schedule. It's 808. 808 is audits. It's wrong. Now you have sample two, one right, one wrong, which means your classification accuracy rate so far out of a sample of two is 50%. So you keep going. And as an example, after 36, if you were to have 18 right and 18 wrong, that would be a 50% accuracy rate. Either way, whatever the rate is, 10 of those people in those departments send an email to the records manager at the end of the day with 10 different numbers. And those numbers are averaged out, and that's your daily classification accuracy rate. And it had better be above 85%, because if not, you'll never be able to fix it. We call that poisoning the well. But you have to do that 5 days a week. Why? Because if you don't, a year, 2, 3 years from now, when you go to pull the trigger and dispose of millions of documents, you don't know. You don't know if it's safe to pull the trigger. So you would have to measure it. But how do you measure it? You can't. It's too late. So you don't have enough confidence to pull the trigger and do a disposition. That is a complete, fatal, unfixable failure of an EDRMS project. And trust me when I say this, the vast majority of all EDRMS projects in the world today cannot do a disposition. I can name many live examples. And there's a lot of records people wandering around thinking that they're going to do a disposition, but they can't. And they won't when the day comes. Complete failure of the system. Don't let it happen to you. Measure this every single day. Now, what does a number mean? How do we interpret it? It means that whatever the rate is that you measured, I call it X% accuracy rate, we have a 95% confidence, 19 times out of 20, that it's the right number. What it really means is that if you were to measure 85%, then it means that it could be as low as 80% or as high as 90. That's not good. We need it above 85. So what we really are measuring is 90. That way it could be as low as 85 or as high as 95. That's really your target number that you're measuring for, okay? And in a properly deployed EDRMS, it is no trouble to stay well above 90%. You should be very, very low accuracy rate. Okay, now, what about Purview? I threw this in because some of you, I'm sure, are going to be using Purview. So Purview comes along with its unique challenges that the other 4 products don't have. This is number 1. Out of the box, its posture, the way it comes out of the box, so to speak, is it has retention and compliance coming from users, not from the organization. That's upside down. You have to reverse that. Now, the only way to reverse it is with automation. So the other 4 products are automation forward. They assume their posture is, well, of course, we're not going to have the users do this. That wouldn't work. So it's all automation. With Purview, it's all from the end users, which is wrong, which will fail. But fortunately, they do have an automation capability. It's just not quite as strong as the other four, but it'll get you there. Okay? So now, what are the unique challenges that you have with Purview? The premise of this session is to show you what you have to get right to make sure that you don't suffer those fatal flaws, right? So the first one is there's a button in SharePoint called Apply Label. Make it disappear. You don't want that button because if it's there, the users can decide what retention rule they want at any time. Can't have that. Number two is cases. Purview is extremely weak on that, and it's very tricky technically to get it to work. Most people use custom-built solutions to get cases working properly. We do, and it works fine. Out of the box, it'll work up to maybe a couple hundred users. We can stretch our imagination. We think we can do it out of the box up to maybe 1,000, but we're using some pretty sophisticated tricks to do it. But if you're above 200 to 1,000 users, you're likely going to have to do some custom-built work here. And why? It's because there's a severe internal limitation of 100 refinable strings allowable in KQL queries and auto-apply policies. Now, if you didn't understand that sentence, you don't understand Microsoft Purview. But that's how you do a case, that's how you assign a retention rule in Purview. You use an auto-apply policy, which contains a KQL, keyword, query, language, query, which in turn contains a refinable string, and you only have 100. That means that by the time you've entered auto-apply policies for your first 100 categories, you're out of business. You're out of business. It runs out of steam. And number four is retention policies must be avoided. What the heck is a retention policy? Well, we don't have time to cover that here, but it's a way to do retention that conflicts with your retention schedule. It conflicts with it. You don't want conflicts. You need to avoid them. So the secret to deploying Purview successfully is to know what to avoid, when to use a workaround, and know when to custom build because it's not going to work. Okay? Purview is extremely technical, and I'm not exaggerating. It is extremely technical. Microsoft has invented records with their vision of what records is, looks like, and behaves, not what we're used to. Okay? So it's very, very tricky to deploy it properly anyway. Here's what I meant earlier when I said don't use retention policies. Here we have a site, SharePoint site with two subsites and a library under subsite 1 and a library under subsite 2. Here's what we have in place. We have a retention policy that says keep for 5 years on site 1, which means that everything in site 1 has that rule applied to it. So here I am in library 1. That's me. I'm a document sitting right here. So I have retained for 5 years. Someone comes along to subsite 1 and says delete in 10. Now I have 2 rules. They compete with each other. Along comes a user who says, I don't like any of that. I'm going to put my own retention rule on it. How? With a label. I'm going to click that magic apply label button, and I'm going to put delete in 2 years because that's what I'm in the mood for. Now I have 1, 2, 3 competing rules on me. Eventually, the records manager says, hold on, everybody. There's an official rule which I'm going to impose. It's the official corporate rule. I'm going to apply a label that says delete in 5 years or whatever. But I can't. Why not? Because the user overrules the records manager. Okay? The user, if they can apply a rule to that document, they can do so no matter what anyone else says. They win every time. So do you see this? The only way to avoid this competing mess is to A, not use retention policies. You don't need them, don't use them, and don't let users apply their own labels. So now the only way to apply a retention label is through auto apply from the records manager on behalf of the official retention schedule. That's the only way to do it, okay? Now, the refinable strings. This is an actual example of 1, 2, 3, 4 categories. SOPs, union grievances, contracts, I forgot to put the contracts in here, and capital projects. 4 categories. And it's the actual KQL query that you had to put in the auto apply policy. And you'll notice over here that you have to use a refinable string for each unique column that you use in your auto apply policy. So here we're using if published equals yes, the retention is 25 years. But if it's not yes, then it's 5 years. Typical normal retention rules. So here the KQL query says refinable string 1 is maps to the field published, and the value is yes, then we use the 25-year rule. If the value in that field is no, we use the 5-year rule. So we've now consumed a refinable string for that one category. We consume a second one, a third one, and a fourth one for each category. So you pretty much need a minimum of 1 per category. Now, here's the problem. We have 800 categories, and we only have 100 refinable strings. We run out of steam pretty quick. And there's no way around that. So around the world, people who have already deployed Purview are struggling with this, and they're coming up with workarounds, some which work, some which don't. But you've got to make this work one way or the other. So this is where the problem comes into play. This button, this is a screenshot from SharePoint. This is the right-hand side of the screen. And here you see a button called Apply Label. It must not appear on the screen ever, okay? Because if it's there, then all of a sudden the user can do whatever they want and override anything they want. That's not compliance. That's anti-compliance. So it has to be avoided. So now I've shown you what the threats are and how to overcome the threats. Now I'm going to show you how to do a deployment efficiently, fast and accurately using Catalyst. Catalyst is a set of tools that we wrote here at RIMtech. There's a whole separate company for Catalyst, but we call it Information Governance Tools. And their sole reason for existence is for you to get through this stuff as quickly and efficiently and accurately as possible. So there are 3 components. Number 1 is a retention schedule, and it's already done. It's software ready to be imported into any one of those 5 software products, okay? It has 2,200 activities in it. Do you need 2,200? Of course not. But this is a catalog of 2,200, mostly municipal. There's 1,600 of them are municipal and 600 are generic. If you're a municipality, you're laughing all the way to the bank. If you're not, you can get a huge start with up to 600 generic categories. What does generic mean? Well, stuff that happens in every business, like audits, contracts, employees, legal litigation, investigations, you name it. Fleet vehicle maintenance. You don't have to be a municipality to have a fleet, right? So there are a good 600 of them that are generic. And then we have the SharePoint information architecture. Remember, 14 columns times the number of categories. So we have over 30,000 columns, assignments, right? Over 30,000 of them. So any of these categories that you use, you already have the metadata ready to go in SharePoint. We have 2,200 content types, over 1,000 term store entries, and 4,400 library views, 2 per library, okay? So the Catalyst will take this data, these 30,000 column assignments, and it will deploy it in SharePoint in a day, okay? So this is all the various tools, the components of Catalyst. They're all supplementary helpers to help with various aspects of deployment. This here shows the process. I won't walk you through all the gory details of it, but it's very highly structured process where we use spreadsheets to define the data, and then the Catalyst deploys in SharePoint based on these spreadsheets. So there are four artifacts here. There's a spreadsheet that defines, or sorry, a Word document that defines the definition of all the categories. Then there's a metadata map, which defines all the elements of SharePoint. There's a retention schedule, which is an Excel spreadsheet that can be loaded into any one of these 5 record software products. And then there's the SDM, SharePoint Deployment Map, which is a PDF picture of everything going on under the hood in SharePoint. Okay? All very useful for deployment. So I'll just show you a glimpse of these 4 artifacts. Here's the RCD, which is a unstructured, or I should say semi-structured document that describes each category in the retention schedule and its metadata and the retention rule down below here. Okay, it's raw data. This is the retention schedule, which is machine actionable. That's what you need. You can't take your existing retention schedule and just shove it into any of these 5 products. It won't work. You have to make it machine readable, and then you have to load it into your record software. So you can see over here, the retention rules are very technical. They're structured in a way that the machine can understand them. This is the metadata map. So if you were to pick 800 categories, you would have 11,200 rows in this spreadsheet, okay? And yeah, we do it all the time. And you can see the columns per activity. This has 2 activities, office space management and P-card, credit card usage and reconciliation. And you can see this one has 15 metadata fields, the second one has 14, okay? And all the various characteristics in SharePoint. This is the SDM, where it has 1 page for each library in SharePoint. That includes a description of what should go in that library, how the document sets would be named, the retention rules, and all the details of the metadata and some statistics. 1 page per library. So this is a phenomenal photograph of what's going on in SharePoint. What exactly do we have? And here is a list of unique columns, not the list, it's just a single page capture, but you can see all the different columns, unique columns, and how many times they're used across SharePoint. And of all the columns in SharePoint, typically about 15% or so will be populated with a drop-down list. So that's all these lists are stored in SharePoint's term store. They're called managed metadata lists. And the term store, this is a screen capture of its contents. Here, for example, are business units. So there's about 15 business units here. So you would have to tailor that to your organization. What do you call your business units? What are your vehicles? What about buildings? Well, you need a list of your buildings, that kind of thing. And statistics. Now, it turns out that no matter which of the 5 software products you buy for record keeping, you're going to have to go through 6 steps. There's no way to avoid these 6 steps. Absolutely no way. So here they are. Number 1 is take your existing retention schedule and change it. You have to generate a new one from it, which is machine readable. That could take you a year or 2. And we have one client where it took us 3.5 years. Number 3, you have to get that shiny new machine readable retention schedule and load it into your record software. That should take an hour if you've done it properly. If you don't do it by import, you have to type it in by hand, which could take you several weeks. Step 4 is we have to have the SharePoint information architecture. Where are all these records going to go? Well, 800 places and 11,200 columns and tens of thousands of document sets. So in step 4, you have to write all that down in a spreadsheet. You got to record it somewhere. And that's what step 4 is, defining that information architecture. So we do it in a spreadsheet, and we do have 11,200 rows in that spreadsheet. The next step is to take that spreadsheet and hand it to your IT and say, IT, would you kindly take these monstrous spreadsheets and build it in SharePoint for us? Yeah. How long will that take? Months, possibly a year, but it will take that long. Okay. But once it's all finally up and running in SharePoint, then and only then can you reach step 6, which is where you can type in into your record software those 2,400 rules. Why do we have to wait so long? Because in order to put the rules into the record software, the information architecture has to be in existence because the rules are calling out the names of the libraries. They're calling out the names of the metadata fields. So they have to exist in order to create the rules. How long will it take you to create the rules? From scratch, 1 to 2 months. Now, a typical example is 45 person days. If you sat down and had no interruptions and did nothing but this, you could do those 2,445 days. Do you have 8 hours a day with no interruptions? No? This could take you 6 months easily, okay? Yeah, this is realistic. These numbers I'm giving you are real. They're actual, okay? And if you're bigger than 1,000 people, just do a multiplier, okay? Anyway, this can take you quite a long time. So that probably explains why so many organizations out there don't reach a successful EDRMS. Look at the effort involved. It's massive. But with Catalyst, this is what we do. We try to take all this effort out as much as possible. So if you're a municipality, well, we've got you covered. We're ready to go. All you do is you take those 800 libraries, or well, 2,200, and pick whatever you need, typically 800, and just pick what you need. That's all you're doing. This could be done in a few days. If you're not a municipality, then all you have to choose from is the 600 generic ones, which will cut your time down to half, maybe half, right? Now, once you've got this spreadsheet done, where we can define the SharePoint architecture, then Catalyst will do it in a single day. So there you go, from months to a single day. Now, in the future, not today, but in the future, next year, sometime in 2026, we're going to release another version of Catalyst that's going to do number 6 completely automated. So you won't need to spend those 45 person days of effort. So that's going to be automatic as well. So we have what we call an IDP, an industry deployment package. That refers to a whole industry in a box. We only have one today, which is for municipalities, 2,200. We envision in the future we might have one for police departments and other organizations, but for today it's only municipalities. But if you are a municipality, then every one of these 6 tasks all of a sudden shrinks to a few weeks, potentially, versus a few years. Like this is a dramatic reduction in effort. Huge in both time and therefore money. So all you have to do with if you're a municipality is to adjust the retention schedule, change your lists, pick from the 2,200 which ones you need. That's pretty well all you're doing. And then you just deploy it, test it, make sure you're okay with it, build a customized search, and you're done. This is what a typical landing page would look like in an out-of-the-box SharePoint deployment, a very simple, straightforward deployment. Each of these widgets on the screen is a library, and you can navigate to other libraries at the top of the screen. The top screen capture here shows a library called Competitive Procurement, and in it are 6 document sets, 6 cases, right? Because each competitive procurement is quite an adventure, an RFP. Down below, we drill down into one of them called a bucket truck. That was a particular adventure, and in it we have 3 documents. So that's what it looks like on the screen. And these are unsophisticated deployments. These are just straightforward, out of the box, no custom work, nothing fancy going on. If you have basic competence in your own shop, you could do this no problem once it's been deployed with Catalyst. So that's it. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me. I appreciate it. And feel free to follow through with us. We have lots of recordings on our YouTube website, and you can visit our two websites here. Thank you again.